Welcome to Winning Hand, the podcast about Marvel Champions, one card at a time. I have something very special for the listeners today. Something very special times two for the listeners. We have two guests. I am joined today by Josserroo and Astrodar. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey now.
Hey, thanks for having us on.
Of course. So we will get to the guests in just a minute. Before we do, I just wanted to circle back. We had a giveaway recently where I was giving away the Kree Fanatic print and play set, the modular set, and we did have a winner. We randomly chose Discord user named Septus. So congratulations. That will be in the mail to you very shortly. I hope you enjoy it. All right. Well, in the spirit of giveaways, let's just jump in real quick. We have Josserroo brought some giveaway items. So Josserroo, I'll let you announce those.
Yeah, thank you. So we have some alt art / full art for 4 different heroes, and we're going to give away 2 sets of those. So Boomguy is going to post a link to a Google form that you can enter your name in. We have Angel, Cyclops, Storm, and Deadpool. So when we reach out to you, you can let us know which one you want. Hopefully the one that you want isn't already claimed. And that will be the plan. So Angel, Cyclops, Storm, Deadpool, alt art plus full art.
Awesome. Thank you. I will do a Google form and I'll just have people put their information and we'll do a ranked choice voting. So you'll be able to choose your first through fourth choice. And then as we choose people out, whatever the first person gets their top choice, the second person gets their top choice. So whichever one's still available and so on. And then we'll have your contact information will be in there too. So I'll reach out to you if you're a winner and let you know, and you can tell me where to send them. So thanks for bringing things along, Josserroo. That is awesome.
My pleasure.
Some of those alt arts are really cool. I think of those 4, it's hard to pick a favorite, but Angel is really, really awesome.
I really like the Cyclops hero alt art.
Like the big laser blast. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, his is one of my favorites from that. But I think Domino is the biggest improvement from normal to alt art. So
okay,
that's my personal favorite out of the whole set.
Yeah. Way to pick a favorite that we're not giving away, Astrodar.
I know. It's because I already stole it. So
yeah. Oh, fair enough. Okay, so usually what we do when we have guests, this is the first time we have 2 guests at the same time. But usually what we do is we let people introduce themselves, and I have a few questions so the listeners can get to know you a little bit. Josserroo is from the Road to Nowhere podcast. As he himself told me, it is a podcast even more niche than this podcast. So I will let him introduce that quickly. Also, Astrodar is from the Alter Ego Chronicle. I don't know if you're from the Alter Ego Chronicle, but you write for the Alter Ego Chronicle. And that's a written form, so not a podcast. There will be links to both of your contents in the show notes or down below if you're watching on YouTube. So if you're interested in either of those, please click. But gentlemen, why don't you each introduce yourself quickly, and then I've got a few questions for you.
Love it. So yeah, I'm Josserroo, as Boomguy said. This is going to be relevant because Astrodar and I will probably both talk about it a fair bit because it's going to give context for some of the other answers we give. But we both are regulars in Solo Champions League, which is a league run by Innsmouth Bear that has on the order of about 100 players playing every season. He puts out 5 rounds of challenges that a bunch of us compete to do the best in terms of how fast we do it, how clean the board is, those sorts of things. And it's a very lovely community in terms of lots of, even though it's a competitive thing, people post their decks and talk strategy and all those things during the rounds. So people are really trying to help each other do our mutual best. And I run Road to Nowhere, which is a recap podcast. So after the round is over, we look at the top performing decks and we talk about the different decisions that people made in terms of how they actually achieved success. Astrodar is a very regular guest host on that, and we have lots of other folks in that community that also join for as guest host. So this is, like I said, if we've got about 100 players, and there's some peripheral people that also pay attention, but we've got an audience that's not much bigger than 100 people that we're drawing from for the podcast. So, pretty niche.
All right, Astrodar.
Well, so I'm Astrodar. Yeah, pretty much what Joss said. I hang out around the Discord a lot, and so that's where I just got really like pulled into the community and started doing things like Solo Champions League, where I just really enjoy that like challenge where I get a deck build specifically toward that challenge. It fills that need for me to do that. But then I also started writing a blog because I have a face for radio and a voice for writing. So no, so I started writing blogs. It's just my kind of preferred format to express myself. So just wanted to put out some stuff that was helpful for new players. Largely is what I'm targeting there, but while also including stuff for veterans that have been around for a long while.
And importantly, your dad jokes come through best in that medium.
That is true. Yep, I try and incorporate those quite frequently.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Astrodar, it's great to have you here, traveling from the year 2005 in the blogosphere. So it's great that you time traveled through.
Multiverse.
Yeah. I have bad news about the future of blogs in 2024, but when you get here, you'll find out. No, I joke. It's a really good. Actually, I quite like it. I read all the time when you post. It hasn't. I feel like you've not posted in a bit.
Yeah. I took a little bit of a break just for regular life stuff, and then Con of Heroes kind of took over for a bit. And so I actually just right after Con of Heroes, when I got back, started writing again and updating some stuff. And so we're back at it.
Oh, awesome. Good to hear it's still going. But I really loved the you did a March Madness tournament where people voted. I thought that was really cool. That was one of the more memorable ones I remember participating in. So, and I think you're on Reddit too under a different name. Is that right?
Yes, on Reddit I am Infinite Square Whale, which is one of my favorite physics puns from college. But yeah, so I'm Infinite Square Whale on Reddit and Astrodar on everything else.
Okay. All right. So I've got a few questions for the two of you. So let's jump in. You both introduced yourself. I want to know from each of you, and whoever wants to go first can, at what point in the game's life cycle did you get into the game?
Okay. Mine joining into the game was a bit serendipitous. I had just watched WandaVision, the final episode, and then went to my game shop, and it turns out that was the day that Scarlet Witch released the Hero Pack. And I just came off a hiatus of not purchasing any board games for over a year. And that Marvel Champions was my first game back into it. So I bought Marvel Champions that day, Doctor Strange, and Scarlet Witch. And then I found out that I started at the peak of Hero Packs in terms of power. and so, but it hooked me, and I started collecting ever since then.
I jumped in, I think, right when the Cap and Ms. Marvel packs dropped. So briefly after launch, I was listening to a bunch of podcasts. I do a lot of solo gaming, and it kind of sounded like it maybe wasn't the best for solo based on some of the early discussions of it, right? It's so easy to lose to Rhino in solo if he schemes, those sorts of things. So I was a little bit tentative, but then I decided to dive in, and then I've, just been a subscriber ever since.
All right. So now I want to know favorite heroes for both of you.
Astrodar, should I set you up a little?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so Boomguy we somewhat recently got back from Con of Heroes, played some bunch of games with Astrodar, played some games with Boomguy. Boomguy likes to ask me what my favorite of a thing is,
Yeah.
and I like to not give him a clean answer.
Yeah.
Right? True?
That's the thing.
So
Yeah.
I actually had a student ask me who my favorite band was, and I told him I had to think about it for a bit, and my list of my favorite band was actually 30 bands. So this is how cagey I am in terms of trying to answer these sorts of questions. But what I want to point out is something Astrodar was just talking about. Was he updated his hero complexity article somewhat recently? He has these two categories, critical decisions and sequencing decisions. I don't know, Astrodar, you want to explain what those ones are?
Yeah, so this was an article where I broke down kind of the heroes into categories based on how they actually feel to pilot, to actually play them out. And so the sequencing decisions, these are heroes where you often have to put a lot of thought into the order in which you're doing their events, because you can really maximize your turn by doing things in a particular order. If you mess up that sequence, you might really undercut your turn. And then the critical decisions category is one where your decision tree is a lot wider open. Like you have a lot more options, and you're going to have these big decisions throughout the game where uh, these have like high impact. And so something like one of my best favorite examples is Star-Lord. Star-Lord would be in this critical decisions one, where he has that big decision each turn. Do I take an encounter card to play something to the table for a discount? And so he can use that to pay for anything, and you have to decide whether or not that you're getting value out of that. And so, yeah, those are the two top categories, kind of like more on the complex side of things.
And these two categories tend to be where I find most of my favorites, and I think the critical decisions is definitely the highest hit rate. So just as example, Adam Warlock, Colossus, Domino, Gambit, Magic, Psylocke, Star-Lord. Those are all heroes I like a lot. But to the actual short answer, which is not the short answer, is Rocket, who is somebody that I know all three of you on this pod, Boomguy, have spoken about as a hero that you definitely all like. I don't think some of the other heroes that I like quite a bit I've played enough to actually supplant Rocket, but I love Rocket. I love heroes that you get lots of goodies for flipping to alter ego. I think that's a really fun part of the game. So the ones that unlock some of that stuff, and I like ones that have lots of interesting decisions. So Rocket's in the sequencing decisions one, but Star-Lord's I also really love, but it's because he kind of breaks the game. He's not even really playing the same game as anybody else. You're making just such different decisions compared to everybody else. Astrodar, what about you?
So I am actually the same. Joss and I share a lot of personality traits, and I am so bad at picking favorites.
And degrees.
Yes. So I'll narrow it down though. So my top four. I'll give you my top four because they're always in flux. But it is Miss Marvel, Spider, Captain Marvel, and Wasp. I just find all of those very engaging, and depending on the day, any one of them could pop out on top.
Okay. Well, Joss, as you mentioned, yes, I did ask you favorites a couple times at the con in person, and I was expecting a lengthy answer, but that was probably even longer than I was expecting. It was like a 3-minute answer for just a favorite question, but that's fine. We'll press on. So the next question I have for you, and we'll see how long this one takes. So favorite aspect.
No, this one's actually easier, even though there's a new dark horse. But in 1 and 2 player, it's justice. In 3 and 4 player, it's leadership. And it's actually kind of a similar reason to maybe why Astrodar likes Captain Marvel. Is Captain Marvel enables, because of our economy, enables you to just try some really interesting decks and do really interesting things. And I think in higher player counts, you can just do such interesting things with leadership, and so I find it really engaging. But in 1 and 2, especially because both Astrodar and I play a lot of 1 player in Solo Champions League, Justice is just such a nice way to, there's lots of card draw, you keep the main scheme under control, which is a really big thing in Solo, those sorts of things.
Yeah. For me, I am protection all the way, 100%.
A man after my own heart.
And so that's the one time that I can like give a solid favorite answer. And for a little bit, I thought I was gonna move away from protection as a favorite, but then they released repurpose, and I was sold again.
Yeah,
So,
I've been protection from the beginning. I think initially protection was pretty weak, but I always liked the idea of it. I really like playing support heroes and support characters, and I really liked the idea of protecting and healing and doing that kind of stuff. Core set, I don't think it was super viable, but it's better now. I think there's a lot of different archetypes, and I think it's the most fun. So agreed with you, Astrodar.
Yeah, I love how much variety you can get in there, and then just protection more so than most of the aspects. I feel like has the tools to really amplify the hero kit, and so there's a lot of heroes you can just really let them like amplify what they're trying to do through protection, and so it kind of has that dual aspect of am I helping others by defending or supporting them, or am I letting my hero kit shine? And so that's why I
Agreed.
love it.
All right. Favorite villain. And before we started, Josserroo asked me, is there only space for one? Yes, Josserroo, there's only space for one. We do have other things to talk about in this podcast. So quick hit, favorite villain, both of you.
Zola.
Astrodar?
Brotherhood of Badoon. So Drang.
Ooh, Drang. Okay. And favorite player count or primary player count? What do you guys? Are you guys both solo players mostly?
I'll say 2-player because it's mostly outside of Solo Champions League. It's two-handed or playing multiplayer at two.
I think 2-player is my favorite. I think the game shines the most at 2-player. 3-player, it's also pretty good, but because of Solo Champions League, I play a crap ton of solo.
So that's what you play most at?
Yeah, absolutely play the most at, but 2-player, if I got to choose, I would play 2-player.
Yeah, I think 2-player has the right balance of like pacing and speed of game, but also being able to not just play solo, which can be a little swingier. But 3 is great. 3, I think you can specialize a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can lean into really doing just a niche build. 4 for me just gets too long.
Yes.
Thank you for introducing yourselves. So I will let you guys start. What is on your mind, or what have you been playing recently?
As recently mentioned, we just got back from Con of Heroes and
We did.
all played some games with each other. And
Yeah.
one of the things I did was I brought 5 different Valkyrie decks to Con of Heroes, which
Okay.
which
That's a choice.
which didn't make me as unpopular as you might think. In part because they were all actually quite competent Valkyrie decks, but I want to talk about something different actually, because of the deck I played with you, Boomguy, which was a domino deck built around the Wolverine ally. It's originally intended to be a Team Strike deck, but it required playing with an X-Men character at the table that can give you honorary X-Men's, because Team Strike actually requires that you also be an X-Men character. So those Team Strikes came out, and I put in a game time so that I could use Wolverine multiple times a turn. And then with Domino, you can build up those game times on the Painted Lady, and then have some big fun turns with Wolverine. So that was some awesome fun. And then I actually played a similar deck with Cyclops as well, where game time is a tactic. So all of Cyclops' recursion and tutoring for tactics allows you to grab game time when you want it to then get extra activations out of our boy Wolverine.
I remember last year at the Con of Heroes, also I played with you, Josserroo, and you also brought decks where you had cards that you gave to other people that they would hope to play. I think it was a rogue deck last year, and you were like, "Oh, can you put this in your deck, and can you please play this on me?" So that's an interesting. I've not ever done that in a multiplayer game. I've played games where I put cards in my deck that I give to other people, but I've never had cards set aside that I like ask them to play on me. So that's interesting.
It's a bit of a shtick of
Yeah.
mine, and you're right. The rogue deck was kind of the most egregious example of it, because I had Guardian and Avengers upgrades. So I actually, in the best case scenario, I needed both a Guardians and an Avengers character at the table to hand honoraries to then put on me. So yeah, patience was required by people who played with me.
No, that's all fun. Astrodar, what's on your mind?
So I this year for Con of Heroes, I decided I'd trim it down and I'd only bring one hero in each aspect, because last year I brought way too many heroes. And so this time I just brought 5, and the one I think I had the most fun with Well, the one I had the most fun with was probably my Captain Marvel Web Warrior deck that's just designed to hand cards out like crazy. But I also brought that last year. So this year my favorite was Drax Protection, but designed to actually defend. And so I don't know that it is the strongest version of Drax, but it was a lot of fun because it's designed around the concept that like one of Drax's biggest faults is finding Dweethite Mastery, because that enables a lot of his card draw. But he also has another card draw, which is once his counters are built, anytime he's attacked, he gets by the villain, he gets card draw. So this deck was designed to use defense events and basic defenses to pull the entire table's attacks to you, build counters super fast, and then no matter what, you are getting to draw a card every time after that. And so I had a lot of fun with it. It leans into things like anticipated attack, which was really fun in multiplayer because that requires a side scheme, is in the victory display. And in multiplayer, that just happens so fast. Like, it's super easy to have that by turn one. And so that gives you a tough and pulls the attack to you. And so you take no damage, get your card draw, handle a block. And then the rest of it is built around you dealing damage back with things like counterpunch or his own events or retaliates and ping damage from protection upgrades. And so I had a blast with that one. Just basically you could flip down, heal up to full, flip back up, and recharge your counters in one turn. So I had a good time with that one.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever seen someone play a Drax protection deck that was built around defending. I've seen Drax played a lot, and that's cool that you took this kind of roundabout way to turn him into Peter Parker, to just draw a card when you're attacked.
yeah, I would say Peter Parker definitely does it better.
It would have been quicker to still play Peter Parker, but
yeah, I think the one thing Drax brings to it is that all of his the ping damage and retaliate and extra stuff like that gets around a lot of things like retaliate and stuff like that. So at the con, it was a lot of fun because we had scenarios where that were either from the con or that Joss created up, and that had retaliate 2 or even up to retaliate 3. And so he was skirting around all of these, taking all this damage back by just pinging it with non-attack stuff.
Boomguy, I have a question for you.
yeah.
Have you ever played with somebody playing Drax that wasn't Lazy Titan?
Yes.
Because I could tell you why, if that was the case, I could tell you why you've only ever seen one version of
Yeah.
Drax.
Well, that's Lazy Titan's favorite way to play Drax and one of his favorite decks overall. I've played a few times at the con, people playing Drax, but I don't see Drax that often, to be honest, in a multiplayer setting. I know that Americano from MCM, that's also his favorite hero, one of his favorite decks. I played that with him a few times. And I think my old game group, I saw it once or twice. But Drax is not a real popular hero, I don't think.
Yeah, I think he has some fun moments, but in his most efficient and powerful version, I think he does have some pretty straightforward play lines. So I think a lot of people kind of played him, had a good time, and then moved on to other heroes.
You know, I think that's an interesting discussion, probably for a future episode. But I feel like there are a number of heroes I can think off the top of my head that have a very obvious, like at first glance, way to play them. And whether it's individual people or the community built around certain content creators or whatever the case may be, I think they kind of get stuck there. And I would say Drax in the protection kind of readying and attacking build is one of those. It's also his kind of pre-con, so maybe that's what led people that way. But, you know, off the top of my head, I can think about Ghost Spider protection as well. Or, you know, Vision decks that abuse Vivian. Like, that just kind of people start there because it's the most obvious and it's really good. And then I feel like they don't get a lot of development beyond that community-wide. So it'd be an interesting thing to think about in the future sometime. Because I think Ghost Spider is one of those for me that definitely works in other aspects, but has like a clear one that's probably the most straightforward and maybe even best, kind of like Drax does. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other fun and interesting builds.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see with how many heroes there are. where people are able to spend their time with the game. And so like there's some people like me that play a lot that I'm willing to go back and revisit some things that maybe I haven't or maybe aren't the most efficient, like Drax defending. But it's always interesting, and I feel like you almost just need someone to touch on it and show that it can be done a different way, and then a lot more people are willing to kind of like engage with it and run with it from there.
Yeah. No, I really like that. And you actually, to be honest, you've kind of inspired me now. I want to try Drax defending deck because that sounds kind of fun.
It's a good time. What have you been playing?
You know, we just came back for the Con of Heroes a couple weeks ago, and I brought, like you, I brought 5 decks this time. I took kind of the rainbow approach and took one in every aspect. The one that I ended up playing the most and couldn't stop thinking about and had fun with was my Star-Lord pool deck. And I know I played with Josserroo with this deck. I played it probably almost half the games I played over the weekend at Con of Heroes, and I played 27 games logged. I think I played probably half of them in the Star-Lord pool deck, and I didn't expect to have so much fun. But, you know, I played it a few times, and then I just wanted to keep playing it. It was so much fun. It was a blast. I think in a multiplayer setting, it works better when you have, you know, someone to help a little bit, because his early game weakness, right, is just his fragility. And until you get a little set up, he can get killed by harder scenarios pretty easily. But, you know, you used build support to sneak in IPAC and draw those extra encounter cards. And the Deadpool core ship was really kind of key to that build because it allowed me to sneak in allies and give me encounter cards to juice up my attacks with sliding shot, but also brought in some allies to help me defend or thwart if I needed to. And I just focused on trying to do as much damage as I could with Star-Lord. I think Headpool a number of different times cleared out some really tough minions. Headpool's a ton of fun. You know, with Star-Lord, he thwarts for 3, which is great anyway. And I don't really care about the Amplify icon because whatever, he's probably just going to block that attack anyway. But getting rid of some Sentinels in Master Mold, or getting rid of Dreadpool, being able to get minions to attack each other is really fun. But yeah, it was really built around using Mulligan as much as I could too. So getting all my resource sinks out, and then you park Mulligan on plot convenience and then pull it out when you're ready for it, drawing extra turns, going crazy. Yeah, Mulligan works really great for Star-Lord because, you know, you can empty your entire hand and then just take an encounter card to play Mulligan. So yeah, it was a ton of fun. I had a number of games where I had one game in particular, I remember, where I finished off with 5 encounter cards and was able to play 2 sliding shots in the last round. So you're just dealing massive amounts of damage and, you know, hoping that the consequences of your decisions don't come home to roost, right? You're essentially trying to outrace your bad choices. And that's a lot of fun. So yeah, that's what I've been thinking about. I haven't played it since the con, but I still think about it. And I think that deck in particular, but also some other decks I saw throughout the weekend, really kind of turned my opinion about the pool aspect overall. I was pretty down on it, I think, on record on this podcast. I'm still down on Deadpool the hero, but the pool aspect I have really come around on, and I hope we see more support.
I was going to ask about that. So I do remember that you weren't all that enthusiastic about pool, and then seeing you play Star-Lord pool made my eyebrows go up. And I couldn't remember what your opinion on Star-Lord was either. So I was wondering if those are both things you came around on a
Yeah,
bit.
Star-Lord is kind of middle of the pack for me. I like Star-Lord. I don't love Star-Lord. I find myself the decision tree of like when to take the encounter card. I find that to be really interesting, and I think it's dependent on so many things, you know, the player count especially, but you know, when you're taking those and when you're trying to do Star-Lord things and when you just need to take it easy and not do Star-Lord things. But I think he has a lot of interesting builds, kind of with his Leader of the Guardians ability and being able to do different stuff. It's really cool. I think Star-Lord has maybe climbed a little bit, but he's still probably top 3rd for me in Heroes in terms of like fun. But yeah, the pool aspect was the biggest jump for me. All right, well, that's what we've been playing recently and thinking about. Obviously, we're still thinking about the Con of Heroes, which if you're listening to this and you didn't go, I cannot tell you if it's worth it or not. It's expensive, obviously, if you don't live locally, but it's a great time, and I'm sure you'd enjoy it if you like the game. So think about it if you want to go next year. please join us.
And I hear you have a recap episode.
I do have a recap episode that already went up. That was 2 episodes ago. So if anybody wants to listen to that, go back and listen to episode 34, where we talked all about the Con of Heroes. And it was a good time. And that's my full thoughts are in there. Do you guys have any final thoughts on Con of Heroes before we move on?
Astrodar?
I had a blast. I've had a blast every year I've gone. So if it's something that you can swing and want to swing, I highly recommend it.
Yep, had a blast. I love things that you get to go to, once a year and make new friendships and then look forward to kind of re-engaging. So I met Boomguy and the second one, and then was excited to get to play again this year.
Yeah, and I met people from at least 3 different countries outside the U.S. So, it is international. I can't imagine the cost involved in traveling overseas, but if you can swing it, you should, because it's really, really fun. All right, well, Astrodar, I'm glad that your favorite aspect is protection, because that segues nicely into our card of the day. Obviously, if you click the link, you already know what the card of the day is. It is the Protection Ally Starhawk. So I've heard that you have a particular affinity for Starhawk, Astrodar, so I'm excited to hear about that. Before we get into discussing it, let's just read the card. So Astrodar, maybe can you read the card for us so we know what we're talking about?
Absolutely. So we're looking at Starhawk, or subtitle Stakar Ogord, possibly. I never know how that's pronounced. But 2 cost Protection Ally with 3 HP. It has the Aerial and Guardian trait. 1 Thwart with 1 consequential. 2 attack with 2 consequential damage. A physical resource icon, and then the important part, the Interrupt. When Starhawk takes damage exactly equal to his remaining hit points, return him to your hand.
And he has flavor text, which says, I am one who knows.
Yes.
It's a little cryptic, and we'll get into that. So we kind of have 4 different topics we talk about with each card. The first one is art. So I want to shout out, this is art from a comic. It's from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, number 4 from 2008. So this is comic art.
Yeah, and it has a really good comic. This is one of my favorite comic series, is the Annihilation event that leads into this Guardians of the Galaxy. But I actually really love this art. And I can't ever tell if that's biased by knowing what comic it comes from. But he just looks like so intense. I really like the coloring and shading in it. I think it really kind of like captures his intensity well.
Let's talk about the art first. I will say your take might be flavored by knowing what this is. As someone who has no idea what a Starhawk is and doesn't read comics, when I look at this, it is very difficult for me to understand who this is, what they're doing. It's kind of dark. I do like the shading and kind of the coloring of it, but it looks like a guy wearing a suit that has kind of like Loki horns. It's like a blue suit with gold accents, and he's got some kind of yellow energy around his hands maybe, but it looks like he's holding something kind of off frame on the right. I can't tell what that is. He's looking intently. I can't tell what he's looking at. Yeah, Josserroo, what do you think?
I think the biggest problem with this thing is the cropping, honestly. It's kind of to your point, Boomguy, where it's really hard to tell what this person is actually all about, what they're doing, because it's so zoomed in. It's mostly just a head and shoulders with some arms.
Yeah.
You have no real sense what's going on. But I like Astrodar's take that this is a really intense character, and he looks pretty intense in this picture. Like, knowing that, I then see it in the art, but I might not have seen it if I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think I agree. If you're telling me he's an intense character, I get intensity from this image, but I can't really tell anything else about his powers, his background, what he's doing in the image. I think it kind of suffers in that sense.
I could definitely see that, because there's a lot that, like, in the context of the comic, well, it's actually kind of funny to have him on an ally card here, because in this particular scene, he is the antagonist to the Guardians
Mm.
through a segment. But no, I could definitely see like agreed the cropping. It makes it tough to really tell what he's all about. But
So you seem like maybe you read a lot of comics, Astrodar. So maybe you can speak to who Starhawk is a little bit. I did a little bit of research. I kind of stopped at Wikipedia, to be totally honest, but I pulled out a few things. So maybe you know better than I do. You can kind of talk a little bit about this, but I'm curious if you could give us a little bit of the background of the character, as much as you know, before we get into kind of the theming of the card.
so I don't know much about Starhawk outside of that particular run.
Hmm.
But in that run, Starhawk is actually one of the Guardians of the Galaxy from the future, from like the year 3009. And his introduction to the Guardians of the Galaxy we know, Star-Lord and the like, is he is traveling back through time. So he just shows up, starts attacking the Guardians, and then he'll pop away and be gone, disappear. But he has this. He was trying here to fix an anomaly that was causing the universe to get destroyed, and so he had this ability to maintain the memories as he changed from across basically different timelines and multiverses, because every time he came back to do something, it would change his or her future. Like he changed gender and everything across the storyline as he jumped back and forth. And so that is the extent of what I know of them.
According to Wikipedia, listeners, Stakar Olgord is an anti-hero and was fated to eventually re-inhabit his infant body, reliving his life over and over countless times. And because of the knowledge of things to come, he manipulated events to effect what he felt would be the best outcome, referring to himself as one who knows. And he made many enemies in doing so, but tampering and guidance also led to the formation of the Guardians of the Galaxy in the future where he comes from, like you mentioned earlier. So, citation there is Wikipedia. If you want to learn more, just Google it yourself. So that speaks to his flavor text a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
The one who knows, which doesn't make any sense, I think, unless you know about the character.
Yeah.
But now, having read that, the theming of the card makes a lot more sense to me. So, his kind of loop that we're going to talk about in terms of gameplay makes sense in terms of him reliving his life over and over.
Yeah, the theming on the card works really well for me, of him essentially popping in, popping out, having this cycle that repeats.
Mm-hmm.
I think they nailed it on the theming.
Similar to you, Boomguy. Most of the Starhawk information is coming to me from your Wikipedia and from Astrodar's explanation. I do read a modest amount of comics, but I have not read Annihilation, so I wasn't familiar with Starhawk at all. But I do really like this idea of, if Starhawk is always kind of coming in and trying to change what's going on, that there's some sense of, mission accomplished at the point when he's run out of health and then has to retreat and then come back in again as a new version of Starhawk over and over again. So I think that's kind of a beautiful thematic
I
thing.
think the theme works. Like, having learned a little bit about the character, I think they did hit the theme here. Let's transition into kind of the power and the fun of this card, which is where I think the bulk of the discussion is going to be. And so why don't you speak to that a little bit, Josserroo, if you don't mind starting us off here?
One of the things I was just going to loop back to, one other thing that I was thinking about when looking at this card was this the first card that had double consequential for an activation? This came out with Galaxy's Most Wanted.
I mean, Groot
I'm not
came in the
sure.
same box, right? The gray ally. I can think off the top of my head he has two. So they would have come out together.
Right.
Was there one before that?
I don't recall one. It's something that
I don't know.
I think Galaxy's Most Wanted was where that was introduced.
I think the Galaxies did start that. So, yeah, let's call him the first. Listeners, if we're wrong, winninghandpodcast@gmail.com.
I do love your make proclamations and, reach out if I'm wrong.
Tell me I'm wrong.
Style. So power, I think a lot of it is about the way that you actually use him in the deck. And I often look at a lot of these cards as, being like a certain other card, but maybe having additional benefits. So I think of Starhawk as being a little bit like the resourceful card with benefits. So resourceful is an upgrade, a one cost upgrade that you can discard from in play to get a wild resource. So Starhawk, you can kind of set him up to effectively be a physical resource by getting him back to his hand. He costs one more, so he can do a lot of other things. But while he's sitting on the board, he is a potential resource in your hand because of that his ability to retrieve.
Interesting. Yeah, for me, the first thing I think of is the Penny Parker ally, the gray one, right? Just because of the looping. That's probably the most obvious one, but resourceful, I can see that. That makes sense too. I mean, in terms of power, I'll just say I did a little bit of research on protection allies, and we always say in the show that 2-cost allies are just good because, if they do nothing else than their basic activation or whatever they get when they come into the game and then take a block for you, it's usually worth it. So right off the bat, 2-cost ally is really good. I think maybe in protection, at least in some of the archetypes, you want to defend yourself, so the chump blocking becomes a little bit less valuable, potentially. But in a multiplayer game, you can use it for someone else. So I kind of looked through. There's only 7 2-cost protection allies. I wanted to kind of see where he ranked there. So if we're looking at the 7, there are a few that are trait locked. And those include Armor, the X-Men ally, Silk, and Pinpoint, which can only be played if you either control a Web Warrior or you have the keyword for Armor and Pinpoint. So among the non-trait locked 2-cost allies, there's only Starhawk, the Daredevil that came with the SPDR pack, Clea, and Victor Mancha. I can't remember what pack Clea came in, but Victor Mancha came with Justice. So if you think about those, right, there's only 4 2-cost allies that everybody can use. And Starhawk isn't the worst one. I don't know if he's the best one. They're all pretty good. What do you guys think?
I think that I think if you're looking at the trait locked stuff, Armor and Silk win out. Just that trait lock lets them have a bit of a boost. Pinpoint, you're still kind of building around to make sure you can utilize him. But I think of the others, Starhawk is the most versatile because he has better stats than Clea and shows back up in your hand when you want him to a little bit. I like I never use the ability on the 2-cost Daredevil, so
it's hard to hit.
And then Victor Mancha's good, but I think Starhawk is just his flexibility that he offers is huge, and particularly when he came out. Just having a source of 1 extra thwart for protection for solo play was massive. And despite there being much wider pool, I think that his kind of his power has stayed pretty constant. Like it's risen with the pool because he's still very usable and very strong in protection decks.
I'm hard pressed to not include him in any protection deck. That pretty much, it is kind of an auto include. I think, Clea, if I'm just trying to make sure I get my ally count up a little bit, is also someone I would often include, but Starhawk pretty much goes into every single one. And I think, as you were discussing earlier, the 2-cost allies, with a typical 5 hand size, it means you can do another thing with your hand. If you're protection, you're often playing a 1-cost event, and then you still have enough stuff in your hand after playing a 1-cost event to be able to get Starhawk out. So he synergizes in terms of playing out your hand. He synergizes with a lot of protection strategies, I think.
I think of those 4 non-trait locked ones we talked about, I think Victor Mancha is the one I include probably the most. I love to be able to put him out and, if there's minions that have 1 attack or something, he can just kind of absorb those, and that means I don't have to worry about them. I can kind of leave them there. Even 2 attack minions can sit there, and he can absorb a number of different attacks. And obviously, I play a lot of vision, so I can recur him. That makes it easy. But
I was going to say, it tracks that Victor Mancha would be your most played.
yeah, I just think he's really good. Even in, we talked about Star-Lord earlier. I've played a number of different protection Star-Lord builds, and it's great to just have, he's almost like a cheaper, worse version of Groot, but to be able to consistently defend kind of low cost minions and I can ignore them for a little bit is really valuable to me. But Starhawk is right near the top as well. I do like that you can, and then we're gonna blend the discussion on fun here too. But I really like that you can play around with how he goes in and out of play when you want him to, and
Mhm.
and that's interesting. So let's transition into that part of the conversation. I know there's things that you all want to say, so maybe I'll let you kind of lead us off your Astrodar about the fun aspect, unless you want to touch on power more.
Oh, now like it blends for me here with Starhawk, just
Mm-hmm.
because he is
Yep.
he fits that perfect bill of adding an additional decision point, like spreading out or widening that decision space while also still being very efficient. And so it increases how I engage with the game while still like not making me feel like I'm playing down. And so I think one of the big things here that I love in terms of both fun and power is that he kind of brings the whole Guardian tribe with him, almost like the feel of the tribe with him. I love Guardians, and so usually with a lot of teams, if I want to have like a team focused build, if I want to run, Web Warriors, I have to bring all the Web Warriors to turn on things like Web of Life of Destiny. Or if I'm doing Avengers Tower, I want to make sure I have enough Avengers or only Avengers. But Starhawk, you can bring Nowhere along with him, and you know that with just him, you can be hitting that card draw off of Nowhere every time. And so you can almost bring this Guardian identity to your deck, which I love, while also still knowing that you're hitting all these triggers and this, empowering your hand. So that's one of the things I love the most about him is that he kind of like carries that whole theme of the entire team whenever I'm including him in decks.
What about you, Josserroo?
This was a card that I specifically picked, so I definitely have a strong fun bias for him. But broadly speaking, in the game, I really like cards that
Mm-hmm.
smooth out your hand, that make it feel like you're not spending your hand in a suboptimal way. And so, like Astrodar said, it really widens that decision space. You can really think about, okay, is this a turn that it makes sense to bring Starhawk back to my hand to replay him, or even just hold him and not. For whatever reason, hold them and not use them that turn because you needed that one extra thwart or whatever the case is. He works really well in decks where you can end up with too many resources, Bishop being a really recent example of, that you're going to get these awkward hands where you have tons of cards and nothing to spend them on. And so it's this targeted place that you can actually do it. There's some really fun stuff when you have things like Retaliate out where you can maybe play him multiple times a turn even in decks where you have lots of resources. Yeah, these infinite combos of efficiency like Nowhere and Starhawk bring me quite a bit of joy. Again, it's funny because we didn't really talk about it, but Solo Champions League kind of programs your deck design and play in a very certain way because you're tending to try to do stuff quickly but also quite efficiently. And so you have a certain type of deck design that you do there. Starhawk is a little less useful there because it's a bit of a long-term efficiency sort of thing. But in multiplayer, I mean, Starhawk, you just keep on getting value out of over and over
Yeah, I
again.
think the point that you made, Astrodar, was really interesting about bringing Nowhere with Starhawk, and you don't really need any other Guardians to make it work, unlike some of the other kind of builds of traits where if you're bringing Avengers Tower or you want to make sure you bring a lot of them. I think reminds me of some other combinations that I use in the same way. So you can bring Utopia if you only have, for example, the Nightcrawler ally, and know that you're going to
Yep.
consistently just hit Utopia, even if that's the only X-Men ally you have. And often with Hawkeye, I will bring Sky Destroyer for Mockingbird, even though, you know, generally you want to bring Sky Destroyer, which we talked about, I don't know, like 20 episodes ago, but you only want to bring it if you're bringing kind of a critical mass of shield stuff that's going to be able to hit that consistently. But in a Hawkeye build, you know, similar to this and Nowhere, you're just going to hit it every single turn or potentially every single turn, that damage trigger. So kind of those are also looping combos that I've used a lot. I love building Utopia in with the Nightcrawler ally and just consistently being able to ready yourself or someone else.
Yeah,
But yeah,
those are good shouts because like it's the one of the things I love as the card pool grows is how many cards there are now that I'm just wanting to use, but not having that limitation of needing to include 10 cards to make this thing feel useful, like the support feel useful. Being able to do it with like these 2-card combos, like what you mentioned, and like Starhawk and Nowhere. I think it makes it really fun. But I'm also a sucker for recurring allies without using leadership tricks. So
yeah, it's harder without leadership, right?
oh
You
yeah.
don't have to regroup and stuff.
Well, there's a surprising number that pop out. Like you said, Mockingbird does it. Nightcrawler, Spider, like you mentioned earlier, has this very similar thing. And then I know your favorite ever is Red Dagger. But one of those things is just not having to worry about drawing into your allies.
I think it's interesting. You know, there's a lot of those kind of trait locked things like Mighty Avengers that you really can only use in very specific scenarios where you have to build your entire deck around Mighty Avengers. And I think it's often tempting to use Nowhere like that, right? Like I'm not going to use Nowhere unless I have enough Guardians to make it worth it. But like you just said, you can just use one Guardian, and if you can draw an extra card every single time when you put him down, it becomes a resource generator in and of itself to some degree. And then, like you mentioned, Joss, you can also bring it back to your hand to use another resource if you need it. So
And it is a physical resource, which
matters.
in protection, I think what doesn't kill me is probably the best example of a card that is often very, very high value that you want to play, and having access to that physical resource when you need it can be really nice. Um, but there are some other ones in there, but I think what doesn't kill me is probably my favorite example of a card that I want to hit. There, tackle is another
Does
example
anyone
though.
actually play tackle though?
Yes. Again, solo
Okay.
champions league bias of status effects are pretty valuable in getting through that villain in a
Okay.
very efficient way.
I don't think I've played tackle in a long time, but one thing I'll just say that's a total non sequitur about tackle is that first wave of full art OP promos that they did. If anyone's listening from
Hmm.
FFG,
Hmm.
please bring those back. I love the hero cards and the alt art and full art heroes, but I really liked the full art just cards. And unfortunately, they're now buried
Yep.
in a bunch of first wave cards that are not very good and no one plays anymore, like Stealth Strike and Tackle. But please bring those back. I think those are so awesome. So the last kind of thing I'll touch on with Starhawk is I really love using Starhawk in rogue builds to be able to get that Guardian keyword if you need it for anything. But I built a rogue deck recently where I got the thruster boots. Is that what they're called? The ones that help you prevent damage. Yeah.
Yep.
So I built that in and tried to discard all the discard cards, White Fox and stuff like that off your deck. It wasn't very successful, but it's another keyword you can grab, and it's one of the few guardians you can play without being a guardian. Like all the gray guardians are locked. So if there's no other thoughts on Starhawk, I'll transition to final rating. But do you guys have anything else you want to say before we hit our final ratings?
Um, the last use case that we didn't talk about was indirect damage.
Mm,
Um,
go on.
he's a great indirect damage sink because it's when he loses health so that he's exactly at 0, he goes back to your hand. So there's lots of opportunities to throw indirect damage in his direction, bring him back to your hand.
That's
and
a
use
good
him
call.
again.
I hadn't thought about that, but that's yeah. I like using retaliate. Usually you don't want to use an ally with retaliate because it feels bad. Because that last his point is almost exclusively reserved for just eating a giant attack, and so you don't want to waste it on a retaliate. But with Starhawk, you can waste it and put him back in your hand right away. That's fun. But indirect damage is cool too. I hadn't thought about that. All right, then let's transition to final thoughts time. I'm going to let Astrodar go last because he's the one who loves Starhawk the most. So, Josserroo, I'll let you go first. Can you give us a final rating and some final thoughts on Starhawk?
Do I have to give you just one number?
Oh my gosh. Don't give me your top 5 ratings for Starhawk. No, just one.
Yeah, so my top 5 ratings for Starhawk are I'd say I mean it is almost an auto include for any protection deck for me. I struggle to maybe say a 10. I'd say a 9 for sure. But I don't know what additional thing I want out of this card to give it a 10. So 9. And one thing we also forgot is Aerial Traded.
Ariel traded. Yeah, so it works with Angel.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm going to give this card an 8.5. I think it's really strong on theme. For me, the art lets it down a little bit. I don't really know what I'm looking at, and I don't know the character, so maybe that's partly my fault, but I'm going to make it the game's fault. So it knocks a little point there for me. I think it's not an auto-include for me, but I don't really know why. Like I said, I think I usually include Mancha if I'm going to include a 2-cost ally, unless I'm using one of the trait-locked ones because I'm playing that trait. But I think this episode and thinking about Starhawk more consistently has made me want to put him into more decks, and I do play a lot of protection. So I'll say 8.5. The art's a little weak. The flavor text doesn't make sense unless you know the character. But again, those are minor quibbles. This is a really, really strong card. Astrodar?
So I'll lead with saying that whining and crying will help you get your way. Joss mentioned he was doing this card, and I gave my saddest puppy dog eyes and Charlie Brown slump, and here I am getting to talk about it. So no, this card is absolutely one of my favorites. I'm going to acknowledge right up front my bias on the art and everything, knowing where it's coming from. But for this, I'm going to give it a 9.5.
Woo.
Because, like I said, I have that bias of knowing what's going on in the scene, knowing the character from that comic, so that doesn't bother me at all. I think that the card is one that I need a reason not to include it in a deck,
Yep.
rather than a reason to bring it. And that alone, knowing that the reason I need to not bring it has to be something is going to be far better, like an exclusive X-Men team trait or something. So I find it to be really good, find it to be strong, love the decision space it gives me, and definitely a 9.5 for me.
I'm going to upgrade my score to a 9.49.
Okay.
Just a little bit
Just
less.
a little bit less? Fair enough. No, overall, a really strong card and lots of fun shenanigans you can do with it. And thank you both for joining us for the episode to talk about it. You are both welcome back anytime. It's great to have you here. Before we go, let me just mention one more time, we are doing a giveaway. So we talked about it at the start. There will be a link down below for a Google form. Please enter in. We're just giving away free cards. So there's really nothing to lose here. And let me just tease real quick what we have coming up next on Winning Hand. We are doing another deep dive in June. So we did one of these in February where we, instead of having a bi-weekly episode, we had a weekly release schedule and we talked about team-up cards. This time we are doing a hero deep dive. So we're going to pick one hero and we're going to talk about 4 different cards in that hero's set that we think kind of make them special and speak to the character and the cards overall. And the first one we're picking is, you get no points for guessing, it's Vision. So we're going to talk about Vision all month in June, but don't let that scare you off. So Lethus and I are going to go through and we're going to talk about the hero card and his mass form in the first episode, and then we'll talk about 3 different cards throughout the month. So if you're interested in hearing kind of a deeper dive on a character, a little bit of lore maybe, and kind of how we build decks and the cards that make that hero unique, please join us. If you're not interested in that, please join us anyway, because I'm only here for the clout. So,
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah.
Shouts out to Lethus. I listened to the Red Dagger episode recently, and I really just appreciate the way he talks about cards and playing the game.
yeah.
Really, really appreciated that.
Yeah, Lethus is a great guy. He was completely wrong on Red Dagger, but he's going to come back anyway. So if you listen to the Red Dagger episode, you already know that Lethus had a terrible take. I do not like Red Dagger, but I think I'm in the minority the more people I talk to. So, yeah, thanks for that. And thanks to both of you for joining. I would like to have you back in the future, so let's make sure we coordinate that.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Let's do it.
Yeah, well, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you on the next episode. Bye, everybody.